Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast, the show that inspires you to live a more exciting life. My name is Ismael, and each week I bring to you a conversation, theme, or topic that will not only entertain you, but that will help you living a more meaningful and satisfying life, individually and collectively. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's solo episode, I want to talk about a topic that I have struggled and probably still struggle partially myself quite a bit in my life. And that is setting healthy boundaries for yourself. And before we go into all the details on what healthy boundaries are and why it is important to set them, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate the messages that I got lately from all of you guys. It helps me to receive feedback from you guys to find topics that are interesting for you, even though I also share a bit of very relevant topics in my current life, as you know. And it helps me to put solo episodes together because I know that many of you take value from it. So please, again, I want to encourage you, if you learned something from this episode, please share with me. And more important, please share it with other people that you think can take something away from it. And that is especially true for today's topic, setting boundaries. We have talked quite a bit about goal setting, about a vision, and about different self-development or self-help tools on this podcast. And today we want to talk about something that each and every one of us also can have in place in order to live a happier and more exciting life. And that is setting clear boundaries. So why should you care? Well, first of all, healthy boundaries honor your safe space and your inner desires of what you want from life. Boundaries also help you to communicate towards others clear rules, guidelines, and so forth of how you would like to be treated. And also, clear boundaries can help to avoid burnout and stress. And even more so, they can help to avoid financial and emotional distress. So what are the three main takeaways of today's episode on setting clear boundaries? The first one being to be clear on what you want in life and to set clear boundaries. The second one is that there are techniques, which we will discuss in today's podcast episodes, that you can use to communicate those boundaries to the outside world without hurting anyone. And the third one is that being honest with yourself about your boundaries is to the utmost importance. If you set boundaries, also stick to them. So this is the section where I usually credit authors of books or articles or podcasts that I have recently read on this topic. And again, today I don't really have one particular author or 5 different podcasts that I want to recommend here. But again, it's for myself in this very moment in life, a very personal topic, and it helps me to compile my information, to also do further research, and then to put all that together into a podcast episode that hopefully can also help yourself whenever you're in doubt or whenever you question whether or not your boundaries are good or if you're just starting to set some boundaries. So again, it's a personal topic that's relevant for me in my life right now, and I want to share with you whatever I know about it, what I have learned over the past years, and I hope that it gives value to you. And I'm always more than happy to hear some feedback, what resonates with you, where do you think I missed something, or also where do you disagree with me? Let's have a conversation and exchange personal experience on setting boundaries. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are really an invisible set of terms that define how a person wants to be treated. So personal boundaries are really guidelines, rules, or limits that set the tone for how we would like to communicate, for how we would like to be treated by others. And we build those boundaries by mixing together different opinions, personal experience, beliefs, values, and so forth that have an impact on our life, especially when dealing with other people. For me, setting boundaries is a form of self-care. It helps to set clear rules, limits, and guidelines to other people of how you would like to be treated. They let others know what is and what is not acceptable for yourself. It honors our needs and wants so that we feel respected and safe in our situations and environments. And they can eventually help us a whole bit on avoiding burnout and stressful situations, for example, financially, but also emotionally. And one remark I want to make before talking about benefits of boundaries and techniques on how to set boundaries. Even if you have no idea what your boundaries are today, and if you have not defined such boundaries, it is very likely that you do know the feeling if somebody crosses your personal boundaries. If somebody goes a step too far, if somebody crosses the lines, you are very likely to have already experienced somebody crossing your boundaries, whom you may or may not be fully aware of. But if you do feel that somebody let you down, if you do have already felt that somebody crossed the line, you have already experienced somebody crossing your personal boundaries. For example, when you feel betrayed by someone, or if you feel let down because you have expectations or you had expectations on a certain person. All those are signs that somebody stepped further than your boundaries allowed. And what's also important to understand is that we all do put other people's lives in front of ours at certain points in our lives. This can be especially true if you have children, but this can be also for friends, for relatives, and so forth. And therefore, having clear boundaries has nothing to do with selfishness, at least for myself, but it's self-care. Knowing your boundaries, communicating your boundaries will not only help yourself, but it will help your whole environment to have a better version of yourself. That said, boundaries are not there to punish anyone. They are really there to make you improve your well-being and your happiness in life. They are for your own protection, really. From yourself, from other people surrounding yourself, and from your whole environments. Having clear boundaries help you to be more focused, and having clear boundaries helps you to communicate that focus to the outer world. So why do we need healthy boundaries? Well, first of all, to me at least, we do need healthy boundaries and clarity about such in order to thrive and in order to be the best partner in relationships, in intimate relationships, but also friends and family. So having them in place helps us to communicate straight and clear what we want and what we need in life and in our relationships. Again, this can be relationships with friends, with family members, with colleagues at work, with really anyone. If you know your boundaries and you know how to communicate them, this will help you a whole lot to interact with the outside world and also to understand yourself better. And it also helps us to set limits for ourselves and for other peoples. So not letting other people take advantage of yourself and hurt you. And ultimately, it's a way of practicing self-care and self-respect. Imagine, with unhealthy boundaries in place or no boundaries in place at all, we hurt our self-respect. We may even lose our self-respect because we do things in order to please others. And we say yes to activities, to tasks, and to relationships that don't feel right and that don't overlap with our values and our vision for life. This might help on the short run, But I can assure you, again from personal experience, that on the long run, this will definitely not help. And it's always better to have a moment of clarity, to have some time in the very beginning of a relationship and to take a step back. Because if you reject listening to your inner feelings, if you reject having such boundaries in place, it will hurt you much more on the long run. So let's talk about some benefits of having clear boundaries in place. The first one is that your needs are being met. We all have emotional and physical needs and wants. And we all deserve that those needs are being met. So only when you speak up and communicate what your needs are, the chances increase drastically that you will get it as well. Second is that clear boundaries will result in less anger and resentment. And that is true even if it's difficult or emotional to communicate your boundaries and your needs on the short term. Again, on the long run, you will definitely benefit from having clear boundaries for yourself and your picture of life. Think about what happens without having boundaries. We overcommit, we overspend, we overdo a lot of things. We may even do things that conflict with our values. And most important, we spend time on things that do not align with our values and that are not important to us. We are mistreated, and as a result of that, we get angry and frustrated. So if we have clarity on our boundaries, and if we are able to communicate our needs to the outside world, we can avoid a lot of anger and we can feel much less resentful. And instead, and that's the third benefit of having clear boundaries, feel safe and peaceful. Boundaries protect us. They protect us from emotional and physical harm. This could include physical violence, physical touch, but also manipulation and emotional games. Boundaries also provide freedom from self-criticism and second-guessing yourself all the time. So if you don't have clear boundaries set for yourself, the probabilities are quite high that you result in self-doubt and that you question yourself more often. If on the other hand you have clear boundaries, you can feel much more safe and you can feel much more free and independent. Another benefit of having clear boundaries is that you have much more time to focus on the activities that excite you, that give you a satisfying life. So if you say no to activities, but also to people whom you don't want to spend time with in your life, you inevitably create space to say yes to people and to activities that actually satisfy you, that make you excited and that nurture your life. Activities that you are interested in, that you are excited about and that create a happier self. And that eventually will lead to another benefit of having clear boundaries, and that is to have more compassion. Remember, boundaries are not mean or wrong or meant to punish anyone. It's kind and it is respectful to tell other people around you what's okay and what's not okay for yourself. It sets a clear playing field for the relationships you have. So if you have your boundaries straight, you can act with more compassion towards other people as well. And the sixth benefit of having clear boundaries is that you have greater assertiveness. Boundaries are a way of asserting your needs. In order to set boundaries, you need to gain clarity what you need and what you want to experience in life. It helps you to understand yourself better. You can then assertively ask other people to treat you the way that you would like to be treated. So setting boundaries will really help you to create those assertive skills that you can then use in all aspects of your life. And I hope that those benefits help you to understand why it's so important to have boundaries to begin with. Now that we've talked about the benefits of boundaries, let's talk about what different types of boundaries there are and what are examples of such. Because maybe you have good boundaries in a certain area of your life, but you have not really thought about setting boundaries in others. This can be true for some people. I know people who have very clear boundaries in their personal life, who have very clear boundaries in their financial life, but who, for example, don't have such clear boundaries in their work or in their professional or even in their emotional life. So let's take a look at the first of 7 types of boundaries, and that is physical boundaries. Physical boundaries basically respect, protect your physical space and your body. It's your right not to be touched, to have privacy, and to meet your physical needs, such as eating and resting. Taking sleep, for example. Physical boundaries clearly define that your body and your personal space belongs to you, and how much of that personal space you want to share with other people. And obviously you have different physical boundaries with different people. But it's still good to understand for yourself which physical boundaries do you have to yourself, to your closest partner, to your closest friends, to your family members, to strangers, and to all the other people in your environment. The second type of boundaries is sexual boundaries. Sexual boundaries protect your right for consent and to ask what you like sexually. They basically define what kind of sexual touch you want, how often, with whom, how long, and all those questions. If you have clarity about your own boundaries, you can communicate your needs, your desires, and also your boundaries with the people whom you are intimate. The next type of boundaries is emotional and mental boundaries. Basically, emotional and mental boundaries protect yourself for having your own thoughts and feelings. They help you not to have your feelings criticized or invalidated. They also help you that you are not always in charge for each and everybody's feelings, depending on the situation. So emotional boundaries differentiate your own feelings from other people's feelings. Meaning that in the end, you're only responsible for your own feelings. You're not always responsible for how people feel about certain actions. You're always responsible of how you yourself feel about certain actions or decisions. And emotional boundaries also help us to create a safe space with other people that we feel comfortable sharing information to a certain degree and not sharing this information with other people if it is not the agreement that we made. And there's another type of boundaries, and that is religious and spiritual boundaries that each and every one of us might have. Spiritual boundaries basically protect you to believe in whatever you want. You can worship whomever you want, and you can practice your religious and your spiritual beliefs as long as they are not harming others and as long as they are not harming other people's boundaries. But you always have the right to believe spiritually or religiously whatever you want or whatever you don't want to believe. No family, no partner, and no friend should have the ability to influence you and tell you that this spiritual belief or that this religious belief is right or wrong. You have the freedom to choose for yourself what you believe and what feels right for yourself. And that leads me to a very different type of boundary, and that is financial and material boundaries. Financial and material boundaries basically protect your financial assets and the things that you possess. It protects your right to spend the money and the resources that you have in a way that you want to spend such. And it also protects your right to not give a loan or give permission to use your resources if this is something that you don't want to do. And in the end, it also includes the right to be paid by your employer or by the person who hired you. There's also something that I call time boundaries. This might be one of the most important boundaries, to be honest, that I have for myself. And the time boundary that I have protect the way that I want to spend my time. This is again something that I have struggled many years. How do I protect my time? How do I take time for myself? So being clear about how much time you want to spend on a job, how much time you want to spend in a relationship, and how much time you also need for yourself is so beneficial. It was so beneficial for me that I can only state that this is one of the most important boundaries that I learned to take effect of for myself. Having clear time boundaries protects us from saying yes to things that we don't want to do. It protects us from spending time on activities and with people that we don't want to spend time with. And it protects you from wasting your time and being overworked. And that leads me to one major and very important type or set of boundaries. And that is our non-negotiable boundaries. What do I mean by that? I wholeheartedly believe that all of us have some non-negotiable boundaries. Non-negotiable boundaries are the so-what deal breakers or the must-haves that we have in our relationships and that we must have in place in order to feel safe and secure with whomever we have such. They're usually not so much in the area of personal development or wellness, but they really have to do with safety issues, such as physical violence, emotional abuse, drug or alcohol abuse, fidelity. And again, I believe we all do need to have some non-negotiable boundaries. But at the same point, it's very important to be clear about which of your boundaries you want to put here. Because if you have a non-negotiable boundary and you have it set in place, you must make sure not to break it. So really get a clear understanding of what is utmost important for yourself, like physical violence, like emotional abuse, that you are not being threatened by such. But make sure that you can keep those boundaries in place. Because if you break your own non-negotiable boundaries, and if you show people that they can break your non-negotiable boundaries, this will backfire a whole lot. If any non-negotiable boundary has any meaning for yourself, you have to be willing to follow through with it. It's really counterproductive to set non-negotiable boundaries and not to enforce them. If you have non-negotiables for yourself, make sure to be clear that this is really a non-negotiable for yourself, and then also be clear on how to communicate such a non-negotiable boundary with your partner, with your friends, with your family members, with your colleagues at works, or also with strangers. Even though with strangers, it's very unlikely that you would even discuss and talk about your non-negotiables. But if it happens, try to be as clear as possible about how and why those non-negotiables exist for yourself. And that leads me to how do we set and how do we communicate healthy boundaries? There's a few techniques that have worked for myself and that I want to share today. And if you have additional techniques, also if you have additional types of boundaries that you would like to raise and discuss, please make sure to share them. And I'm very excited to discuss and talk with all of you guys about different boundaries and about different ways on how to set boundaries. So let's take a look at some ways that work for me. The first one being, again, as so often, get clarity. So first, get really clear about the boundary that you want to set and that you need to put in place. Second is to understand why you really need this boundary to be set in. Second is to really understand why you need this boundary. This is basically your motivation to set this boundary. If you don't have a compelling reason to set this boundary, you will not have enough motivation and willpower to follow through if needed. So really understand the why behind a boundary. Is it something that you want, or is it something that you want to want? Third is to be straightforward. Don't be cryptic or don't be purposefully vague just because you think that you would like to avoid an uncomfortable discussion, an uncomfortable situation. Be clear about your boundary and communicate such. Only if you have clarity that you can communicate to the other person can really understand your boundaries and respect them. The kindest and most successful approach is to be direct. And again, something that can hurt on the short term will definitely benefit you on the long term. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And don't apologize and give long explanations for your boundaries. If you do give long explanations or justifications for your boundaries, this can set the tone that you are doing something wrong, that you need to explain yourself. And remember, you really don't. If it's your personal boundary that you communicate straightforward and directly with other people, there is no need at all to explain it to other people. Number 5 is to use a calm and polite tone to set boundaries. It's very different to talk about your boundaries when in rage or in anger. Keep your own anger in check. Don't try to set boundaries in the middle of an argument. It won't work. You want your message to be heard. So you really want to deliver it in a good moment, without anger, without emotions really. And you want your partner, or you want the person that you set this boundary with, to listen and to listen actively and not to be taken away by their anger and by their fear. Another hint is to start with tighter boundaries and to later loosen them up if needed. It's always easier to have tighter boundaries to begin with and to loosen them up over time than vice versa. If you start with very loose boundaries and over time you would like to make them more tighter, usually people will not accept and people will not understand. If you have set yourself a boundary very tight, that you don't want to be touched, that you don't want to have any physical interaction with somebody, for example, and you change your mind about that, you can loosen up and you can change and communicate that change. If from the very beginning you didn't set that boundary and you said everything would be good and everything would be cool, and then something changes about that, it is more likely that the counterpart, that the other person, the other people, your environment will not understand this change and will want to go back to what was communicated earlier. So again, set close or tight boundaries to begin with, and then loosen them as needed and as wanted. And if boundaries are violated, communicate early as possible in fact. Small challenges and small problems are so much easier to deal with. Don't wait until somebody's violated your boundaries multiple, dozens of times before you speak up. It's not fair to assume also that other people know your boundaries if you have not communicated them. And this is also true for violating. If somebody violates your boundaries, it's not fair to assume that this person does so on purpose, that this person knows that he or she is violating your boundaries. But if you tell them that this action, this movement, this whatsoever violated your boundaries, you can expect them, you can make sure that they know about it. And only if you tell a person that he or she has violated your boundaries, they must be aware of such. So always make sure if somebody violates your boundaries, speak up. Don't speak up after a week, a month, a year, or even 10 years. Speak up immediately and talk about why and how you feel about it. And finally, and you guys know I love my intuition, and that is also true for boundaries, for setting boundaries and for keeping boundaries. Listen to your intuition. Be sure to slow down and tune into yourself. Pay attention to what you are feeling in your body. Again, this is something that I have been doing a lot over the past weeks. We had a recent podcast episode on big decisions, on life decisions. And one technique that I use so much is to really put myself into a position, into a desired state, and see how does my body react. Do I feel good about it? Do I have a heavy chest? Do I feel something in my belly? For me, it's really good to listen to my body, and I can only encourage you to do the same. Your intuition usually knows what's best for you, and it also knows what's worst for you. Listen to this voice, really. What is your gut feeling? If it does feel wrong, make a change. And if it does feel right, go for it. And that leads me to two final thoughts on boundaries. The first one being, please uphold the integrity of your boundaries. It's one thing to set a boundary with your partner or another person. and it's another thing altogether to keep it up. If you feel that your boundary is crossed in any way or another, please do speak up as soon as possible and communicate that you feel that your boundary has been crossed and that something needs to be done about it. And talking about partnership, it's also important, at least for myself, to realize and accept when it's time to seek help from somebody else. I know that this is a sensitive topic and I know that there is very different approaches out there. But for myself, I really do believe that there is not the time that it starts to be right to see somebody else. I personally believe that it can help couples tremendously to have somebody to talk to from the very beginning. And not only from the time that something goes wrong or that you see that you have challenges and difficulties in your relationship. I wholeheartedly believe that it's good to have somebody to talk to even if things are going good. Even if things feel like they will feel forever. Again, this will not be the case, or it's at least very unlikely that this feeling will last forever. And it's so much easier to start talking to somebody together with your partner when things are easy compared to when things are going wrong. And if you do not like the idea of having somebody to talk to from the very beginning, then that's perfectly fine. Then that's your opinion, that's your assumption, and that's your relationship. That's your choice to make. But please acknowledge that boundaries have been crossed multiple times. And please acknowledge that now is the time to seek help. And communicate that with your partner. Communicate that, again, not while having an argument, not while being in anger, but in a clear-headed moment when you can address that with your partner. In the end, if boundaries have been crossed multiple times, the only way to avoid so is by talking about it. And oftentimes it can really help to have somebody on board that can help you as a couple to talk about difficult situations and crossing boundaries. Be honest with yourself and be honest with your partner. I wish you and your partner the very best, that you do not experience that moment too often or too fast. But also be assured that pretty much all couples will experience this situation and there is nothing wrong about it. And with that, I want to say thank you for staying until the very end of this podcast episode on how to set and keep clear boundaries. Again, if you have something that you feel I have missed in my presentation, that I have not included into my personal experience sharing with you guys, reach out, let me know, send me a message, leave a comment on YouTube, and make sure to let me know. And also please make sure to share this episode with a friend or 2 or 5 if it resonates with you and if you think that somebody else can take value from it as well. There is, like always on my solo episodes, a few questions that I would like to share. And I'm already looking forward hearing from you if you have answers and what those might be. I really enjoy chatting with each and every one of you. So make sure to drop me a message with an answer to those questions. Do you have set boundaries in the 7 areas that we discussed today? Which sexual boundaries do you have in place? What are the benefits of your sexual boundaries and when did you put them into place? Do you have clear mental and emotional boundaries? If so, are they communicated with your partner and with your environment? Do you have spiritual or religious boundaries? And whom did you communicate those to? What are your financial and material boundaries? And why are they important for you? What are your time boundaries? And how clear are you about them? And finally, what are your non-negotiables? Again, I'm looking forward hearing from all of you, and I hope that you have a wonderful day and that this conversation on setting boundaries inspired you to get some clarity and to communicate your boundaries and your needs. If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or 2 and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ismaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Do more of what makes you happy.
Be yourself positive.
Change.
Just another mindset.